ado, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. So I'll start with Erwin. He's the current CEO for Headlamp Health. Erwin, if you want to kind of quickly introduce yourself and a little bit background about you as well.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to today's session. I'm Erwin Estigarribia. I'm currently serving as CEO of Headlamp Health. We're a company based in the San Francisco Bay Area, specializing in mental health. In short, we bring precision medicine into the mental health care space, which is much needed. A little bit about myself. I was educated in Australia. I have a background in chemical engineering and have been in life sciences exclusively for over 25 years. I've worked for companies like Cairo Novartis, which are quite large and quite early to the biotechnology game. I was involved in some very early stem cell work, putting the first stem cells into humans, and largest IND filed to date and approved through the agency. And I've done several molecular diagnostic companies ranging from gene expression to whole genome sequencing, proteomics, and the last one was in glycoproteomics, where we took an 8-month-long process from academia, built a recurring neural network about 7 years ago, which most people didn't know what that was. Now I can say ChatGPT, and most people understand that, and took that process from 8 months down to 6 minutes and built a very interesting business around that and raised large amounts of capital. So happy to be here. And obviously, as I always say, if you have questions beyond this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through other various means. Thanks, Ryan.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Selena.
Yes, well, happy to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. And my background is a lot less sexier than Erwin's. So starting with, I have an undergrad degree in speech therapy and physical therapy, and wound up on the business side of healthcare with a startup in the managed care space when it was called managed care before it became the big bad publicly traded insurance sector that it is today, working for a very progressive back to the future value-based startup where I ran and built out all of the value-based risk contracting, and then eventually had the opportunity to engage in my first startup, which was starting up a Medicare Advantage plan in the Texas market, specifically Dallas and Houston, which wound up being wildly successful and high touch on care coordination, and over 5 years was sold to Aetna. And I then assumed plan president roles at Aetna and Humana and exited that industry when it did start to become much more focused on shareholders and less on consumers in 2010, and have subsequently been working in startup and turnaround for a number of technology health solutions, and currently I'm working on my own startup. So being a glutton for punishment, I am in the third startup endeavor, and it is squarely aimed at addressing the deep, profound dissatisfaction in the health insurance space by bringing wellness and a more modern, contemporary, consumer-centric experience in health coverage. So happy to be here.
Awesome. So we have two really incredible speakers today. So we're going to start off with a little bit of the moderated Q&A. As I said, if you have any questions as Erwin or Selena kind of talk, feel free to add them to the chat or even raise your hand, and we can kind of address them as they go. So we're just going to start off and start basics with, how do you know if something is commercializable? You could have some novel technology, but it may not be right for the market. So what are some strategies or insights that have really kind of allowed you to decide whether or not something is commercializable? So I'll let you decide.
Erwin, you want to start
first?
Sure. So I like last year, I'm going to assume that the folks on this call are either scientists or technologists, which is probably a better term. And so I think we all like, innovation and gravitate towards that, and have this thing that we believe is of value and could make an impact to patients or systems or customers. We'll leave it at that. So those are my assumptions for how to answer this question. And as probably cold and brutal as my answer is going to be, um, that is the basis for how the market functions. The market doesn't forgive, and the market doesn't care about your amazing gadget. And I hate that that sounds that cruel, but that's me telling you what time it is. And so, with that background and context, I would say that you might very well be in love with your technology or your gadget or your mousetrap or your process or whatever it is, and you should be. That I think that is the nucleus of being able to start a company or to build a team or to go and get funding for it. But I would urge folks to really try and convince themselves through others telling them that there is value for that item to exist in the market. And so what I mean by that is that if you're trying to, put a round peg in a square hole and trying to convince the market or shape the market for the product that you think you have, that's going to be a lot of pain and suffering. And so what I would urge you is to flip the equation and go out there and spend more time to talk to people and validate that what you have is valuable, and have them tell you where it fits and how it fits and who it is important or not important to. Sometimes the who it's not important to is actually more valuable. So you can not focus on that sector of the market. And I know that the answer is it's somewhat high level in general and might be aggravating for some, but we can expand on that. But that would be my kind of initial feedback. Over to you, Selena.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And now I'm regretting letting you go first because that's my answer as well. So maybe it's good to put a little punctuation point on that because what Erwin just said couldn't be more true. The reality is for those of us who are in this innovation space, it's so easy to fall in love with our own idea, our own gadget, our own technology solution, and then attempt to retrofit that into a market need. And from my perspective, it's one of the reasons why the failure rate in startup is as high as it is. So that plus execution and go to market execution is critically important. So step one is really not defining the product first, but doing that market research. I think that's what you're referring to, Erwin, is so critically important that you not only understand market need, but you deeply understand the kind of psychographic within your target audience and what speaks to them, what resonates with them, which gets more into the go-to-market. But the combination of deeply understanding and taking that external view of directionally what the solution is, so not putting too much specificity on your solution to get people to buy into it, but throwing that concept out there in conceptual terms in ways that will elicit that kind of visceral feedback that you need. And when I say visceral, people, most of us, I think this is well researched, that we all buy off of what hits our amygdala, in love and fear. And so what you're really trying to do in that product market research effort is to identify where the love and fear sits with respect to your solution.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'll probably, sorry, Ryan,
Oh,
I'll
no, you're
probably
good.
just
Go.
add, yeah, I'll probably just add kind of an example that just came to light as
Yeah.
Selena was describing, which is I remember seeing a startup describing that they had this thing that could be used in primary care and why it was novel, and that was the way they told the story for fundraising purposes, and they were not successful. And then I remember seeing them about almost a year later, they still hadn't raised money. And I saw their revised pitch. And the revised pitch was, we've spoken to 1,000 primary care physicians, and this is what they told us was the number one problem they faced. And then they went on to tell you how they've solved that. And they got funding. And then I saw their Series A pitch. And the Series A pitch was, we've spoken to 10,000 primary care physicians. And they literally had stacks of paper of questionnaires. This is before MailChimp, etc. And so that's kind of to highlight how the positioning has changed. But they built a very strong conviction on there's a genuine problem, there's a market, it's sizable, and there's a fit for what we've built, and we're the company that's going to essentially put that peg in that hole.
Yeah, I might add one other finer point to that, because that's a great example. Post pandemic, 2021 was one of the highest, if not the highest, in private equity investments in healthcare technology solutions. And 2022 was as a direct corollary, one of the biggest failure rates in health tech solution startups. Um, the investors' point of view have been kind of coalescing around, and market consensus around, the fact that there's this predisposition to roll out technology solutions in healthcare as silver bullets, and we're in a people business. And so one of the things that I'm observing happening right now as we speak is that the market is now kind of moving toward, what's your technology solution, and how do you invest and integrate a people framework in that solution, which again is kind of goes into the go to market packaging. But I do think that the other thing to kind of lean against, in particularly if your solution is tech focused, is that there has to be some form of people packaging in that go to market effort.
Awesome. I think that's, a really strong component is the market research aspect that you both have highlighted. But let's just say, they've done their diligence process, and there is a need. The other side of that is making sure that your data supports that. So how do you both kind of view data in a commercializable way? I guess, how would you kind of structure your data that would support that claim that there is the need for the market?
Go for it, Eric. Aaron.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I would urge folks to look at their data and put a customer lens on. So if you're presenting data, I think we're all very well trained to display it appropriately, to be very logical and methodical. If we have a study, we always show the number of N's, what the confidence intervals. Those are very basic things that are very, scientifically rigorous and correct. And those are great. But I don't know about most of you, but the last time I purchased a consumable good, and I know that healthcare is different, I want to overemphasize that. The communication of performance or data has to be very easily digestible and accessible. And if you have a very complex, violin plot, for those of you who know what that is, or a volcano plot, or data that is not necessarily intuitive to understand what the takeaway is, you're going to spend a lot of time educating somebody how to read the data as opposed to appreciate what the message and what it means. And so you need to start to transition from taking that data and digesting it to something that a consumer, whether the consumer is somebody that you're trying to raise money from, or somebody you're trying to bring on board as a KOL, for instance, or an advisory group, for instance, is a great way to be able to say, hey, this is how we think and look at the data. If we're trying to reach, again, I'll use a primary care physician or a different type of medical field, how would it be? How would the data look for them to be able to quickly understand what it is that we're trying to say? Why we are better? Why we are faster? Why we are cheaper? Why we're the next thing that they should be gravitating towards? And so the takeaway advice I would give there is put your customers' lenses on. So that's the first part. The second one, which is something I'm a very strong believer in, which is kind of bonus points, is try and figure out who your customer's customer is. So everybody works for somebody. And if your data can communicate a clearer message to somebody who can then repeat that message to whoever they're working for. So let's talk fundraising. If you're talking to a first line VC analyst, for instance, and they understand what your business is and the takeaway data that brings it home. What your goal should be is for them to be able to easily and quickly be able to communicate and pass that on to kind of the internal chain of command within the VC office. They have to be able to sell on your behalf. That is your goal. So quick takeaways are, make sure it's from the customer's lens and make sure they can repeat it on your behalf, because that's how word of mouth actually works. So put that lens on when you look at that data.
Yeah, the only thing, I guess, a couple things that I would add is one, understand, this is kind of an extension of the customer lens, but understand who all the stakeholders are in the buying process. So for your product, invariably, we when we're in B2C mode, tend to think of the customer only, and frequently there are other decision makers or influencers in the mix, in which case really understanding who those influencers in the buying decision are is critically important, and gaining data insights from them also critically important. And I think that's probably the most important part of data collection. The other thing that I would that comes to mind is, as you're preparing for any form of investment pitching, be prepared for the chicken and egg phenomena to come up, where an investor may ask, frequently asks, where's the proof of concept? So as part of that data collection, if you are in a position to road test your product before you, in advance of pitching to the investment community, all the better. Really key part of data collection is a pilot, if you can get that.
Awesome. So I mean, this is actually perfect, because both your responses have continued to kind of lead into the next question or so. So you do get this proof of concept, which I think allows you to get intrigue from potential investors. But how do you kind of really decide what experiments to prioritize, and kind of really looking to establish your budget as you are in these early stages? Are there any things that, these early stage founders should try to avoid during this process? Selena, you want to kind of start that one off?
Sure. I think, not to sound redundant, but you can't put enough emphasis on knowing your market and all aspects of it. So again, we can all fall in love with our own intellectual property. I'm reminded, for whatever reason, of the late Steve Jobs, who, when asked, the question, how many customer insights, and this is going to run contrary, by the way, to what we've said a little bit, but it's good to have a little bit of a contrarian in your thought process as well. And that is, when asked how many customer insights did he get before rolling out the iPhone, he said none, because customers don't know what they want. I think the value of that in terms of prioritizing is not only there is value in understanding the customer insights. You have to understand the customer insights, but I think what he was also getting at is there's always underlying trends that haven't emerged. And to the extent you can deeply understand where the puck is moving, not where it is today, but where it is moving in the market, can help prioritize the way you go about sequencing the commercialization post investment. I don't know if that was completely addressing all aspects of that question, but in terms of prioritization, I'm going through it right now as we speak. So I'll just share that we have, it's not a straight line. I think Erwin would agree with that. There's no straight line in prioritizing when you're in early stage, because the term fail fast is applicable. You have to be able to identify a roadmap, obviously, which should start with the external market research, and then continue to be vetted through those other key stakeholders and influencers. And I think as part of the prioritization, you have to be able to fail fast and have some agility in moving off of an idea you might have been married to that needs to be refined because you've got either different set of market dynamics in play, or you got feedback that we didn't want to hear, but hearing it, more than once, and therefore we've got to adjust the plan. So I would say that part of the another reason for failure, and conversely, opportunity for success is agility in how you go about prioritizing, because it's a dynamic process. There's not really a straight line. I
Yeah,
haven't found
I
there to
think
be one.
no, 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 nothing in nature is a straight line, so that should tell us everything we need to know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the ability to, I'll say two things that might seem discordant, but from at least from my experience, when they're in balance, things tend to move in the right direction. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. And one is what Selena was talking about, which is the ability to adapt. You might have this very crystal clear vision that what you're going to do is going to take you from A to B, and you can see it. That's the difference between a vision and an illusion, is how many people see it, whether it's just you or everybody else. And so you might see a clear path from A to B, but you might get some feedback, which is valid feedback, that there are many steps along the way, and B is not really your end goal for the foreseeable future. It's call it A prime or something like that. So stepping between A and B. And so your ability to adapt to that and still not lose sight of what B is and where it lies. I probably should draw a diagram for this. Is what's going to give you the ability to be successful, the level of
Okay.
adaptability. So the way I think about startups, and I think most of us have a biology background or are familiar with it, is a set of evolutionary challenges. There are these evolutionary pressures, whether they come from the market, they come from competitors, they come from your inner team dynamics, perhaps. It doesn't matter. And your ability to adapt and evolve through those while still trying to achieve your end mission, is the journey of the startup, essentially. And a lot of them die. A lot of things in evolution don't get to crawl out of the pond and become a four-legged creature. And so your goal is to stay alive and make decisions that move you forward, but are not extinction related decisions. So, in terms, I think the question mentioned, how do you prioritize experiments? Don't bet the farm on an entire experiment and say, okay, I have this seed funding, or I only have 6 months. I'm going to do the mother of all experiments, and that's either going to make or break my company. You need to
Yeah.
save those if you're in drug development, for instance, for your phase ones and twos. Like, don't try and roll the dice early on and bet the farm on it. However, you might do some experiments that might tell you thought you had A and you have zero. And so that's the end of that game and you move on.
And I think what you just described leads right into prioritization relative to uh, becoming really Zen Buddhist, about your minimally viable product. So, step one in the prioritization is inherently requires agility, and fast failure and quick refinement toward prioritizing in a framework that is minimally viable. That doesn't put too much pressure on scalability as you're launching, and so really getting down to what, which is where, again, goes back to it's impossible to be as precise as optimum and minimally viable without having crystal clear understanding of those customer insights relative to what your offering is.
Awesome. This is super insightful. So before I kind of start answering some of the questions that have been asked in the chat, as you kind of continue to progress, I think, there's always that goal of looking to partner with pharma, whether that's for manufacturing reasons or, just a strategy in itself. Can you both kind of comment on when do you believe those type of conversations should start to be had. And then, what, insurance conversations as well, kind of at what point, should you be thinking about that?
Yeah. So let's talk about insurance. So I would probably, this is not legal advice. I'll be the first to say that. But from personal experience, um, I would encourage you to think about your personal life, and if you know you have a total asset count of $100, are you going to go and shop for the best insurance rate and do that? And it's probably not worth your time. You're probably better off spending time, you know, kind of growing that asset list to something that's a lot more valuable. And so, this is where boards can help um, in figuring out what that right timing is. And it varies for different stages of different types of companies. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to touch that. Again, not a legal professional, but this is where boards can be helpful. When should you be talking to farmer about manufacturing or any other type of um, kind of partnership? So you have to remember, and I've learned this several times painfully, that your timelines and farmer timelines are very different. And I'll give you two kind of hands-on examples. You probably have enough funding for a handful of quarters. They've got strategic plans that are several years. And so those are disjointed. And your incentives are to ink a deal or have something that you could show an investor or a board or whoever, that you have a kind of partnership or some kind of a relationship with farmer. And you probably want that done in a handful of weeks. Um, corporate goals are measured in quarters, if not years, in pharma. So the other person that you're engaged with, it's incredibly important that you build a strong relationship and that they're your internal champion within that organization. And just know that it's going to take a hell of a lot longer than you think, because they just move slower and they have to, by design. So if you think you need, some kind of a relationship at the end of your Series A or something, I'm just making this up. Um, you know, Start to figure out who the major players are, start to figure out who the stakeholders are, as Selena mentioned, and start to build it up. Even if you're not ready to have a proposition for them, to make them aware of who you are and what you're working on is valuable. And you should start kind of cultivating that as early as possible. If you want to eat oranges, don't plant the tree the day before you want to eat them. Figure out where to plant it, what variety you want, and there could be some really bad springs, and you won't get any fruit. But start early and often.
Yes, so you're once again, just like this time last year, we're synergistically on the same page, because my first thought was both pharma and insurance share one thing in common, and that's they move glacially slow, because they're large, bureaucratic machines. And I'm reminded of something that I have to push myself on every day, and that is networking. You Enough cannot be said about the importance of networking, from beginning to end, as you're working through this uh, launch, the various phases of launch, from start to end. And so, networking, I think, today in this remote world that we live in, is probably even more imperative than it was 20 years ago. It's always been important, but now it's a little harder, because it's a little harder to hit that amygdala, the love, when you're remote. And so, whatever your game, if networking with one person is your standard, I would say double it. You need to a day, right? You need to meet as many and engage with as many people as you can, and start to forge relationships that are beyond virtual as well. So you can start with virtual, but the connective tissue, and not to get mathematical, but for anyone who's familiar with, Google's platform started originally based on combinatorics. So as many nodes and edges as you can create in your network is what it's going to take to create better agility in forging the relationships in both pharma and insurance.
Awesome. So we're going to kind of do an adjacent question that seems to have a decent amount of support for. A lot of these individuals on the call here are scientists. They come from a scientific background, but the intrigue of doing business development, I think, is, a prospect for a career for a lot of them. So what are any suggestions or insights for, those type of individuals who come from a science background, but want to venture into kind of that BD realm?
Well, I'm going to start, I guess, where I left off, and that's with the networking, right? I used to think I was an extrovert because I was on the surface, I appear to be very comfortable shaking hands and kissing babies when the event warrants it. But I've subsequently learned I'm an ambivert. So after a fair amount of external stimulation, I have to have a couple of days of decompression. So the for those who might lean in against, who don't get their energy, and frequently in science, our energy comes from data. It comes from analytics. It comes from geeking out on product development and research, and not necessarily from external engagement. That muscle hasn't been to the gym, maybe naturally, and therefore has to be taken to the gym with intentionality. So if you're making that pivot from more of a science orientation into an external commercial facing business development space, I think I know I have to do it for myself, is have a formal plan, not unlike a nutrition plan or a fitness plan, that I follow every day to ensure that I'm getting the right level of engagement, recognizing that I'd rather curl up and read a book.
I love that. Love that. Um, so I have like three answers to this question, and typically I've been asked this question several times on one-on-one, and it depends on the person and their background. But not knowing that, I'll try and make it as general as possible. Usually, I ask why are you interested in doing business development? And I've heard all kinds of things. I've heard that there's greater opportunities in career development, which they can or cannot be, depends how successful you are, to be frank. Um, I've heard silly things like, oh, I want to play golf and do deals and go to conferences. And I don't know any BD people that do that. So I'm very quick to extinguish that misnomer. Um, and I've heard people tell me I don't think that scientists make good BD people. And I think that's a very, very misguided over generalization. And I will tell you what I have seen be successful in my experience. And that is, look, scientists, do a whole bunch of experiments and are pretty good about getting rejection. Now, the key difference is experiments don't work. And so you got to have to try and keep figuring out how to make the experiment work, or how to test your hypothesis, right? And I think that resilience is very handy for somebody who's looking at going into BD, because you're going to hear a lot of no's, essentially, or get to a lot of dead ends. And your job is to try and figure out how to get to yes, and through whom, and what that looks like. The difference is that when you do an experiment, you run an ELISA, whatever, and you see that the graphs don't look like, or the data doesn't look like the way you thought it would, and so the answer is no, you can be a little bit detached from that. But when you're actively pursuing an individual or an organization, and they physically tell you no, or they ghost you, or they ignore you, you're probably going to take that personally. And that is a transition that you have to make, essentially being rejected from data, from to a human, essentially giving you a type of negative feedback that you either were or were not expecting. And so I would, what I have seen successful is folks that make that transition, and are able to continue that kind of rigorous pursuit, and problem solving, through networking, as Selena mentioned.
Mhm.
Again, if an experiment doesn't work, you can use a different machine or different reagents or a different protocol. You need to substitute all of those for people and organizations in BD. And the folks that I've seen make that transition have been very, very, very successful. So I personally don't subscribe to the idea that scientists don't make good business development people.
No.
I would encourage, if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to speak to folks who have made that transition, and have done that successfully, and get their insights. But it's a personal journey for sure. It's a career change for sure. But there are some basic fundamentals that you've learned as a scientist or a technologist or whatever your background is that are transferable. And so I would encourage you to build on those.
Yeah, completely. I mean, one intellectual property that a scientist possesses over a classic industry standard sales professional, in today's world is highly valuable because we're moving fast. Intellectual property that's compelling is king. Um, One thing I'm reminded of, I have had, as shared, I've been more on the healthcare economics side of the industry, and my technical training is in contracting and healthcare pricing spaces. And yet, the theme throughout my career has been startup and turnaround for transformative growth. And I've had a consistent track record in the latter. So I'm not a dialing for dollars girl, but I have had success and lean into your problem solving skills as a scientist is what I would encourage. Because why I have been successful in startup and turnaround, that has translated into transformative revenue growth for exits is because I start with what is the customer's problem, and really understanding the company. So whoever you're interfacing with, B2B, I go to my strategy, structure, process, people playbook. What's the business mission? What's the strategy? How does that align with structure? Where is there a breakdown in the prospects structure or business process that I can help address? I have found anyone that is relatable, who is solving my problem. I'm going to take that call all day long. And I've had multiple sales teams come in and tell me, well, they won't take our call because X. And I always kind of give some tough love in that response, because if people take calls all day long from someone who's got something compelling to say. We all do it. We embrace it. So, as scientists, I would say you have a leg up in that your intellectual problem-solving skills are at the right side of the bell curve for business development. It's a matter of being able to understand what approach best fits your comfort zone, the space where where your superpowers can shine. And the strategy, structure, process, people framework is actually the Galbraith principle that I learned early in my career. And I have framed all of our go-to-market strategies in these startup and turnaround efforts using that framework, with the external lens again, understanding where the prospect is in that framework and how my solution helps address that.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask an adjacent BD question. Obviously business development kind of, is a focus for a lot of the people here, but does that change across, fields? So let's say therapeutics, medical device, or is business development applicable to each of them individually? And would that also hold true for fundraising?
I might have an answer that's too cynical on some of the I think
Go
it
for it.
probably does to some extent. I have observed this is where, again, I think scientists can help elevate uh, the historic approach to sales, at least in some of these spaces. Medical device and pharma have historically been highly relationship driven, both on the golf course as well as with conferences in Hawaii with physicians. Those days are kind of somewhat behind us. So the relationship piece is always going to be part of the equation. But I think on the whole, because of this remote virtual world that we live in, it has necessitated, I think, the need for having really compelling um, solutions, which require what I, already touched on, and that is deep understanding of what the physician's problem might be. And that might be political too. So many physicians right now, as an example, are extremely frustrated with their signing their life away to the hospital in an employed, physician contract. So 20 years ago, 15% of physicians were employed, and today 80% are employed by a hospital, and a good chunk of them are not happy with the um, the loss of independence and autonomy. So understanding those emotional, qualitative things apply across all sectors, whether you're selling a medical device or pharma, from my point of view. But Erwin, you may have a different perspective.
No, it's along those lines. I think recently I heard something that um a guy that had done several deals in across those three fields, um, sold companies, joint ventures. He had a pretty sizable deal sheet, and they asked him. He's in retirement, but they asked him, what was the one thing that all of those things had in common that led to the success? And he said, looking back, every deal that I had done was with somebody I knew. It wasn't like somebody I just called on the phone or emailed
Yeah.
and I closed the deal. I knew that person.
Yep.
And which is terribly frustrating when you're starting off because you don't know a lot of people. And these days it's hard to physically bump into a lot of people. But you could do that virtually, and we're learning how to do that. And I think there's merit there. And so his advice was don't meet a whole bunch of people because you
Yep.
might end up doing deals with them later on. And I can't tell you how right that rings to me personally. Deals that I have been involved in um, have there are folks that I know or have gotten to know very quickly, or I knew of, or through a network. So it's still a people business, whether you're fundraising or doing BD. And so I would, your technology isn't going to sell itself. And at the end of the day, there is an implied trust that is needed between two parties to either just begin or close a deal.
Uh,
There's more reasons why deals shouldn't happen than reasons for them to happen. You should start off with that mentality. And so, in deal making, you might have two parties where you and the other person across the table might believe in the technology, might believe in the value of it or the problem you're trying to solve. But there might be external pressures from both organizations that might pull you apart, or timing or fatigue and the deal structure, etc. So at the end of the day, you have to rely on trust in people. And so, really spend the time to cultivate your network.
yeah, and that's like, again, we're in 100% alignment. That's really what I was um, thinking about when I think about the golf course, and that's more metaphorically. The reality is it's so easy, and I grew up in the Flintstone era, out of college, where I had the benefit of mentors and other colleagues bringing network to me in the office physically. Um, where rich, rich fertile ground was established for cultivating, engaging relationships way more quickly then than you can today. It's harder. And it's this laptop that this virtual existence that we have that makes it harder. I don't believe in New Year's resolutions, just resolutions. And so one of mine, because I found myself losing it a little bit. I've always been able to forge relationships fairly quickly. It's been frustrating. I've noticed a difference since we've been relying more wholly on virtual meetings, and so my resolution is when and where I can, after having that initial compelling discussion, hop in my car, and if that means a 3-hour drive from Dallas, I'm in Dallas to Austin. I just made arrangements to do that this morning. A year ago, I would have taken that second meeting virtually. But this individual might wind up partnering in an instrumental way in my startup. It's worthwhile to either hop on the plane or get in the car.
Awesome. So we are kind of starting to wind down a little bit. So, one of the last questions I want to ask you both, and I had kind of asked something similar on the last one. Obviously, throughout your experience, there's been a lot of things that you can take away. But if you were going to really pinpoint on one thing to highlight that you've learned, across your career, that would be beneficial to these early stage founders, is there something that really sticks out to you in terms of, which advice that you've kind of learned along the way that you wish you knew earlier?
Oh wow. The
Sorry,
best
it's a very
advice.
open question.
Yeah. Um, the best advice I got from one of the most visionary people. I didn't realize he was the most visionary in the managed care space. He actually wound up being the founder of Express Scripts. Uh, was I'm going to have to modify because he was Irish and had a propensity, had a high alcohol tolerance, and at the Last Supper, he was a Renaissance man, Jesuit trained priest in Rome, spoke 6 languages, had 3 wildly successful startups, ending with the transaction and the rollout of Express Scripts, and had a colorful piece of advice for me as I was in my late 20s, entering this president role for Aetna's third largest plan, and that's so I'm going to make it cleaner. But once you believe your own stuff, you're screwed. Is something that I remember and think about every day. So humility is extremely important. Having said that, you all have already been wildly successful with your accomplishments academically and otherwise. So if I had a regret, I wish when I was entering that role, albeit I was young and was being thrown into the deep end of a publicly traded pool, I wish I didn't have as much imposter syndrome as I had at the time. So there's a fine balance between humility and confidence. Knowing if you've got a body of knowledge around your product that because you've made the observations, you've gotten the customer insights, you have a right to be at the table and you have a right to win. Doing so with humility is always important in everything we do. But don't don't let imposter syndrome take the edge out of your game.
Great advice, and I'm gonna follow in the same suit because advice that was given to me was by an Irish colleague of mine who was at the golden years of his career, and he said, and I could substitute the word, but I'm just gonna say it, and it's not offensive, and I hope I'm not trying to offend anybody, but he said, "Oh, and just remember, everybody thinks they have the prettiest wife at home." So everybody thinks their thing is the thing that's going to be the next best thing since sliced butter or bread or whatever. And so be mindful of that, because that can't be your only edge. You have to be able to articulate it. And to bolt onto that, Celine is absolutely right. You know, there is a balance between humility and confidence, absolutely. And what I wished I had kind of tapped in earlier, although some folks say I got onto it pretty early in my career, but it's worth passing along, is if you pursue truth, you'll land at a natural equilibrium between confidence and uh your seat at the table. If you pursue truth in your product, if you pursue truth in what your customers really want, if you pursue truth in your capabilities or lack thereof, then you position that. I think that shines through, and people build trust in those
Mm.
relationships, whether it's an investor, and they like that because they know where they stand relative to you.
You're talking about authenticity, right? So
Yeah.
if you're authentic, I mean, we all innately are built to engage with one another. So lean into your um, I'll use the rap term, get jiggy with it. With whatever your what you know to be truth, and truth about you, because that emanates engagement automatically.
Awesome. So we're obviously a little bit winding down here. So I'm just going, if there's no last minute questions, I'm going to close us up. So wanted to thank Selena and Erwin again for the seminar. Super excited to have you both back. And the turnout, obviously, for everyone who showed up. The recording should be on YouTube at some point. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to connect with both of them on LinkedIn. I do want to highlight the next seminar in our fundraising seminar, which will happen on February 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This one's going to focus on philanthropic and angel investing. You can register for the event here in the chat if you haven't done so already. But yeah, once again, thank you everybody for showing up. Selena, Erwin, always happy to have you guys back. This is
Yeah,
just truly awesome to have your insights again. And, super excited to see you both succeed as well.
thank you. It's been a fun journey.
Appreciate everybody.
Very
Have a
good
good
day.
one.
Bye.
We can